I'm delighted to welcome you to our Connecting Voices panel discussion series. Our goal has always been to create a forum that fosters meaningful conversations about the PoSH Act, going beyond mere awareness sessions. Building on the success of our pre-COVID program on mental health in PoSH, this year's Connecting Voices series will delve into various aspects of the PoSH Act and much more. We're starting with a foundational session featuring insights from both a PoSH expert and an industry specialist. Let me now introduce our esteemed panel members. Our first panelist is Mr. Karthik Chandrashekar. Karthik is the head of diversity, inclusion, belonging, and people experience PoSH India. With over 16 years of experience at PoSH India, Karthik has been a driving force in fostering inclusive workplaces, cultural transformation, and employee engagement. Currently leading diversity, inclusion, belonging, and people experience, he has previously spearheaded employee experience, business transformation, and organization strategy development. His expertise spans HR policies, change management, stakeholder engagement, and talent development, making him a key leader in shaping progressive and people-centric workplaces. We are thrilled to have Karthik share his robust governance models on safe spaces that he has implemented in his organization. Now, our other panelist is our very own Ms. Srividya Sriram from Sasha. As a PoSH practitioner, Srividya engages as an external member with multiple leading organizations and also supports a few NGOs. She has handled over 500 inquiries and conducted more than 400 trainings till date, covering all spectrums of employees. She has also performed PoSH review audits for various organizations. With her experience and insights, I look forward to hearing some interesting nuggets today. Thank you and welcome both of you. Now, without further ado, let's dive right into the topics in hand. So my first question is to Srividya, but Karthik, please feel free to jump in after, since it's relevant to our current discussion. So Srividya, what is the purpose of the PoSH Act and why is it important in today's workplace?
So I'll start by thanking Yamuna, of course, to me facilitating me to being a part of this panel discussion, and thank you to Karthik for being here. Honored to have you here too, Karthik. So why PoSH? Yeah, we've all spoken it over and over again for 11 years or more maybe, but I'm going to put a few scenarios to make this a little more contextual. Let's say there's an intern coming into workplace. This is her first job. She's maybe 21 and she's all looking forward to, starting a career out there, learning, full of energy. And she has the super boss who's probably very senior, tenured, and much more than her in age. While the job is great, she's seeing a lot of learning. A few things that's making her uncomfortable is having this person stand close to her, peering over her when she is looking at her computer screen, at times affectionately patting her back, and she's pretty confused about it, right? How do you respond to a situation like this? She's unclear. What is that's happening to her? Now let's take another scenario where let's take, it's a retail organization, mid-tier town, a single mother with two growing children at a workplace. The nature of work for her is a daily wage. She is actually into packaging products, and she's a vendor employee deployed on that particular warehouse, at that particular warehouse. Now, the entire control of her employment lies with this in-house full-time supervisor, who openly calls out to say, would you like to sleep with me? And if you don't want to, I can find a replacement in the next 24 hours. All I have to do is to make a call to your vendor, right? And of course, another instance where there is this powerful chief marketing officer who is constantly being put through to this subtle advances by the most senior leader in our organization, and is frightful about it despite being an established leader because of the network out there, right? She can choose to speak up, but that would actually mean an end of career for her. Now, what I'm trying to do while I put out these scenarios is clear to help us understand what is that core that it hits when you face a conduct that is uncomfortable for you at the workplace. It directly hits at your dignity, and that is the need for this act, right? Can I speak up fearlessly and let somebody know who will have my back to say, I will redeem you from this situation? And that's the starting point of this act, respect and dignity at work. So historically, how this came about is this has been spoken. It's a understood thing, the presence of patriarchy, presence of or absence of women at workplace, inability of women to speak up. But the transformational aspect very visibly started at the point of Vishaka in Bhavri Devi's case, which all of us are aware, where what the court specifically recognized is, why is somebody facing this? It's not a personal animosity. It is happening in course of employment. So the nexus between my work and my employment, and that delta gets uncomfortable for me, is where the PoSH Act starts. So after Vishaka, with the directives, 16 years later, this act has come into place. Why PoSH? Coming back to the most important aspect, a fundamental right to work with dignity at a workplace, right? That is where it is a starting point. I'll take a quick pause here. I'd love to hear from Karthik also on what he feels about this.
I mean, that's fantastic, Srividya. Thank you very much. Thank you, Team Sasha, for having me on this panel today. Really appreciate you guys having me here. I think Srividya spoke about the aspect of having this as a fundamental right, and also the element of respect and dignity, right? So just to summarize it quickly in probably 3 points, right? So the purpose of the PoSH Act, if you look from a corporate standpoint, representing an organizational point of view, I think one is prevention, right? So we talk about how do we create a safe and respectful work environment. Srividya, again, connecting it back to the aspect of respect and dignity. How do we create the safe and respectful work environment? So that's prevention. Second topic is on the prohibition aspect of it. So how do we look at prohibition of sexual harassment at all workplaces, right? So irrespective of who it is in the workplace, right? Irrespective of the genders for that matter, right? And at all costs, how do we prohibit it in the workplace? And third important aspect, which is the most important one that we see, is on the aspect of redressal, right? So how do you look at providing an effective grievance redressal mechanism, right? So whom will the person go to when there is an instance of sexual harassment, right? So I mean, the line is very thin, but it happens, and when that happens, whom will they go to, whom will they reach out to, and who's that first person to whom they speak to, right? So from that point of view, having a very I mean the act helps us to set up a robust redressal mechanism. So prevention, prohibition, and redressal, 3 points, quickly putting it on the table for us to answer this question on what is the purpose of the act.
Thank you so much, Karthik. Thank you so much, Srividya. Very, very interesting points, which leads me to another question. Srividya, you gave examples of, you could call them victims, who are all women. And the Act also says sexual harassment of women at the workplace, Prevention, Prohibition, Redressal Act. So 2 questions here. I know we are going to be covering basics, so I will be asking some basic questions. So please bear with me for people who are already at a different level. But there are people here who also have come to listen to this basics, right? So 2 questions here is, does it mean that men do not face sexual harassment in the workplace in India? And the next question is, the PoSH policy, should it be gender specific or gender neutral? What do you have to say? I would like to hear from both of you. Maybe Srividya, you could start, and Karthik definitely pitching.
No, thank you, Yamuna. This is an often asked question by many organizations. The law is not myopic. We are not looking at lawmakers who are thinking that, oh my God, only women have the right. It comes from a very different perspective, where the intent is to bring in a certain equity, right? So classically, traditionally, I mean, not to say that it is a weaker sex, but traditionally there is a disadvantaged position women are having at the workplace, thanks to, like I mentioned, the inherent patriarchy, inability to call out. Then, of course, the social conditioning to actually say. There is always a shame associated with it even today. it's like spotlighting yourself in an organization where you've chosen to build your career and work and all of that, and suddenly you are uncomfortable and you have to reevaluate your position based on an inability of a coworker to understand what experience they're putting you through. So therefore, yes, it is not that other genders don't face this. The intent of the law here is to ensure that they bring in a principle of equity. They brought it in as a welfare legislation. So you give women that prop, that comfort, that trust, the confidence, a cushion to say, hey, the organization is behind you. Come on now, speak up, and let's make sure you feel comfortable and safe here.
Okay, thank you, Srividya. So Karthik, continuing on that discussion, do you think it is good for organizations to have a gender neutral policy or a gender agnostic policy? Because see, the law is very clear and we're talking about principles of equity, but from an organizational point of view, what kind of a policy do you think you would like to have?
I mean, it's very clear. The answer is simple. It has to be gender neutral. Okay, because just look at what is the origin of the act and why is the act has come into force, right? So it's just not about the prevention of sexual harassment, PoSH Act, or, for example, even if you look at the Maternity Benefit Act that people speak about, right? So both of these are actually helping us to create a ring fence around an event that can happen, right? So this could happen to anybody for that matter, right? So it is very important to have a gender neutral perspective because the fundamentals of creating a gender neutral policy, like Srividya was mentioning, is based on the aspect of equity, right? So when you're talking about equitable workplaces, it is for all the genders, right? So I mean, that's how we see it. And in our organization, it is gender agnostic, right? So we use gender neutral language even in the policy formulation. In fact, I'm happy that in many instances where we make communications related to PoSH, managers and people call out and say, hey, I saw a small word which is not gender neutral. Can you please make it gender neutral? Right? So it is for everyone. That's how I see it. And the fundamental of that is to look at creating a psychologically safe place, right? And why do we need that space? Is because that's the foundation of creating all your people practices, policies, and processes, right? So if you lay this foundation very strong, basic on gender neutrality, and then if you are building your people practices, policies, and processes, I think that is the perfect recipe for us to have a robust policy implementation in place.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karthik. Now let's move on to something that is an oft-repeated question. What are the first steps an organization should take to implement the PoSH Act? Right. So, Srividya, if you could start, and definitely, Karthik, you can also kind of say what you think you have been doing in your organization. Srividya, up to you.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a mandatory compliance. So we'll have to remember that this is an outcome of an act, and the compliance is to align with what's called out in the act. But having said that, I think from a perspective of whether the policy is gender neutral or gender agnostic, gender specific, the immediate steps, of course, would be the first thing is to have an anti-sexual harassment policy, which details what gets defined as sexual harassment, right? What are the circumstances under which this can play out? In addition to that, very clearly defining what are the duties of the employer, and of course, where it can play out, right? What gets defined as a workplace and all of that. So this is probably the first step. In addition to that, of course, followed with setting up an internal committee, nominating a set of people. This could be, required at every location, every entity of the organization, all of these compliance steps that we are calling out here. Of course, then comes the point where you disseminate this information to your employees. No point having a policy without your employees not knowing what it is and how do you approach this, right? Then, of course, sensitizing it. The bare minimum would be this. Another compulsory mandate would be to be filing the annual report. So these are the immediate compliance steps that I can think of. There could be good practices that can also be factored in, but I'll at this time hand it over to Karthik to add if there is something else that he has.
I think you have covered it all except for one. Have a robust partner with you. I mean, I can vouch for this 100% because it is. I mean, since it is emerging from an act, right? So it is normally the tendency to say that, hey, just because I want to comply with the act, uh, we tend to get somebody on board as a partner, right? So because you have to have an independent view, right? And that partner is very, very important. So it's, I mean, I would say a best practice from that point of view is to have a partner who's competent, who's capable, who's handled POSH cases in the past, right? And then has the necessary, I would say, capabilities to handle situations. It could be anything. I mean, we take it lightly, but then when the real case happens is when you realize the importance of having the right partner. I think all that Srividya mentioned is right, and also having a right partner is very, very important.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well put. So I just have a question on this. You talked about creating the internal committee. Could you throw more light on the composition of this committee? And I have some more questions on this because these are questions that usually come up. Let's start with the basics of what should the IC compose of?
Yeah. Shall I go ahead?
Yes,
Yamuna?
Go ahead.
So composition of the committee, of course, it's nominated depending on various factors. But what the legislation has called out is a minimum of 4 members with a senior woman employee as the presiding officer, 2 members chosen internally who preferably have some knowledge about the subject matter. Then, of course, an external member, having the said expertise. So this is the bare minimum. Of course, depending on the nature of your organization, the strength of your employees, number of locations, the mandate is, of course, to have this composition at every location. Ensure again you display this information, share your policy, let your employees know about it. Now, a couple of things is that how do you go ahead nominating is it's a set of things that the employer looks at when he puts out a committee there. Intent is to ensure building trust with employees, ensuring redressal is done in the most effective manner, that POSH itself does not feel like a something that's a huge task for a aggrieved person. This, of course, in terms of how this is done, is either there is an employer sign-off nomination or through a board resolution, right? Any additional points that we are looking for, Yamuna, here?
Yes. So I want to ask both of you, what are the challenges that you have seen in the organization when you're creating this internal committee? If you can quickly, in the interest of time also, but if you can quickly list out anything that you have faced, maybe as an external consultant or Karthik as, since you are a leader in DEI, what is it that you have faced as challenges when you started, nominating your members for the IC?
I'll allow Karthik to.
Okay. Maybe we are having this IC composition for many years now. However, when I really see the challenges that somebody could face while they're creating this IC, one is the selection of the IC member, right? So, what is the intent with which we are creating this in the organization? So, that, and then because this is not a role per se, because this is not a defined role per se, people have to, or the IC members have to put in their effort in order to make this happen, right? So while there'll be nothing for a long time, but then once a case is there, you'll have to put your heart out, and I mean it requires a lot of effort that goes into getting the case resolved and then bringing it to a closure. So that kind of mindset for the IC member is very, very important. So have a person in the IC who has this intent that I'm ready to be a part of this, right? So it's not that you select or choose somebody from the organization and then you put this role on them and say, hey, do it. That won't work, right? So that won't be effective. So that's one thing that I would say is very important.
Thank you, Karthik. Srividya, any points here?
Yes. Most of a question asked is if we don't have a senior woman employee as a presiding officer, we don't have these people at every location. So these are probably operational challenges which we will learn to manage based on this. But the key, like Karthik mentioned, is the intent of being on the committee. Are they capable enough to carry ahead this kind of a redressal or inquiry?
So, follow-up question on this with respect to the composition of the internal committee. We've had a couple of clients coming in asking questions like, what if we have all male employees? Or what if we have male and female, but no one's so senior, all at a certain level, especially the females, right? If we want to have a presiding officer who's a senior most female employee, but all the female employees are just, at mid-level or maybe even junior, then what do we do? Do you have any inputs for that?
Yeah, it does not matter that you have only male employees. Mandate by the law, of course, is that if you have 10 or more employees, you need to have this entire compliance in place. You need to have the internal committee also. You don't have a senior woman employee, my advice would be think of recruiting some, or no women employees, think of recruiting one. But the intent is to form a committee. You may not be very senior, but why do we have somebody as a presiding officer is that the stature or the sanctity of the position builds trust for somebody who's agreed to come and speak up. So look at it from that perspective, right? While we go, the letter of the law is important, but what is the intent behind that is something we'll have to keep identifying. So,
fair.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're talking about sexual harassment at the workplace. And Srividya, this question is to you. How do you define workplace sexual harassment under the PoSH Act?
Yeah. So it's there in those three words: workplace sexual harassment. It's as simple as that, right? So a couple of things. One is there is a harassment. It's making somebody uncomfortable. It is altering their work environment. That's one. Second thing is it is in relation to the workplace. There is a nexus with the employment. It impacts my employment, my ability to function effectively, focus on what I do. The third thing, the act or the conduct that's making the aggrieved person uncomfortable is sexual in nature, right? I'm keeping this brief. But having said that, this of course is the bare minimum. But what the beauty of this enactment has, it's gone a step ahead and says now workplace, technically workplace, of course we have all of it wherever you are present in course of your employment. What the act has also looked at is it feeds back to say that if an act that technically doesn't happen in course of employment or at the workplace but comes back to alter your work environment, make the aggrieved either go through a preferential or detrimental treatment or makes the work environment hostile or makes them feel unsafe at the workplace based on a sexual conduct, which either happens in the personal capacity over social media or any other nature or channel, right? Then also it can be kind of brought within the ambit of this policy and can be escalated in the organization. So very briefly, that's how the act has looked at.
Well put. Yeah. Well put, Srividya. Thank you so much. Follow-up questions on whatever we've spoken. You were talking about implementing the PoSH Act, and one of the things you mentioned was to create awareness amongst employees. So, Karthik, this question is to you. What is the best method that you think to create awareness amongst employees?
Sharing on what has worked for us, right? So, one is building awareness has to be a multi-layered approach. That's how I see it. From our learnings, if I could just put it in two simple things, we have followed a pattern called inform and involve, right? So two aspects of communication, right? So inform is for all, right? So it starts from the why of PoSH. You have the elements of the PoSH. What is the procedure? What is the process, right? And what is it from a point of view of the complainant? What is the view from a point of view of the perpetrator? So all that, right? So lot of information, and that's what constitutes the part of inform, right? So and what is the anchor of PoSH in the organization, right? And what is the belief system of the organization? Why is that we are important? Why is it important to have this policy in place in the organization? Not because of the act alone, but what is the belief system of the organization, right? So that's one thing. So inform is an important aspect for us to consider, where we inform a lot of aspects of PoSH in the organization. So that's inform. Second aspect is involve, right? So here is where we look at how do you involve multiple stakeholders in the organization with respect to POSH, right? So be it leadership, executive leadership team, the middle managers, right? And then women employees, the men in the organization, right? So every stakeholder who is part of the organization, how do you involve them, right? It could be something like making POSH sensitization or awareness as a part of the town hall meetings, right? So,
Right.
or it could be, for example, looking at, I mean, we normally do something called as a compliance dialogue, right? So we bring a scenario as a case, and then it is discussed in the meetings, right? So how do you look at having POSH dialogues for that matter, right? So these things have helped, right? So awareness from two-pronged approach. One is inform, and the second one is involve, right? So I think these two, if we balance it well, it could create a very nice effect in the organization from an awareness perspective.
Thank you so much. Srividya, anything that you would like to add here with respect to awareness among employees? Any inputs that you have, how we could engage better with employees?
No, I think I'm aligned with Karthik's view. And the intent, of course, like Karthik said, is at every level, every domain, every function, all stakeholders, right? It's not a singular responsibility. It is a collective responsibility where you're changing culture, changing a culture to feel and agree to feel the fearlessly speak up. So that is where this entire sensitization should kind of progress towards, is my view. Another thing that I would like to add here is, while we continue to say speak up, one of the things we also should be coaching our associates on is confront, right? And when I say confront, it's a step before having to reach out to the organization. We also have to coach our employees to say, when I say confront, I don't mean it in a manner that is like kind of in a confrontational manner. It's just to speak up to the person against whom you feel, with whom you feel uncomfortable, right? And when I say coach this, it's not just putting out to say that, hey, you can talk, because the committee always asks this, right? Have you kind of asked or told him to stop, or told her to stop, or told them to stop?
Right.
So maybe give them the right tools to say, this is exactly what you can communicate. If someone's speaking to you in an inappropriate manner, standing too close, behaving in a certain manner, making you feel diminished, this is exactly the nature of conversation you can have to let them know you are uncomfortable. Another thing with all the stakeholders, one of the other things that is clearly help your employees, your associate understand what is sexual and sexual harassment, because many times they do not understand that someone making a certain remark, or they find it to be very trivial, and they're always confused about, can I bring it to the organization, can I speak to them about it, because I'm not sure whether this is even something that's violating in nature. That's another point. And one more I would like to add is, continue to reinforce, you don't need proof, you don't need evidence. And this is not at just an employee level, your leaders, your HR, because many times they are also confused. They end up saying, oh, if there's no proof, how do you take this ahead, right? Not, it is very with a good intent, but genuinely not understanding how it plays out. So two things: you don't have to have an obvious evidence. You are feeling uncomfortable, reach out, speak up. And also, because you speak up without a supporting nature of evidence or witness, it does not mean that you are fabricating it, right? So this messaging has to continue to go to your employees.
Thank you. So one more follow-up question. I'm sorry, I'm doing a lot of follow-up questions, but both of you are giving me so much of information that I'm just going away with a lot of follow-up questions. Please bear with this. Karthik, this question is to you. Are there any challenges that you've seen companies face while conducting regular POSH training sessions? Because, see, we know it's mandatory. Most of the organizations that are compliant, at least, ensure that they have these sessions. It could be offline or it could be online sessions. What are the issues that you face? Because I've been part of training sessions where barely, out of, say, 30, 50, 100, you may get maybe 15 or 20 coming up for the session. So what are the challenges that you have seen?
Yeah. I mean, the first one is on the taboo part of it, right? So that's prevalent, and also the cynicism around this topic, right? So when you talk about prevention of sexual harassment, the normal tonality is that the victim is a woman or a female employee, right? So there would be a lot of cynicism around it. And like you mentioned, if there are only male employees in an organization, do you really need a committee in place, etc.? Right? So that cynicism exists. So this also has its bearing on the conducting the PoSH training sessions, etc. Why do I need this, right? So why do we need this? So that typically is there. Second one is on the culture element of the organization, right? So
Yes.
like Srividya mentioned, while it is very important for us to communicate as to what constitutes sexual harassment, it is also important to inform what does not constitute, right? So that also is important for us to communicate, right? And this can happen, and it's a very thin line, right? So the definition can get murkier, and that is a challenge that we normally face during conducting PoSH training sessions. Third one is, if I put it, is the ownership, right? So the ownership of the topic, where does it lie? Who's owning the topic of PoSH in the organization? It is the managing director of the organization. Is it the CFO of the company, or a very tall executive leader who's there in the organization has to stand up and be visible on this topic, that yes, this is the person who is owning this topic, right? So if we don't have that, then it is a serious challenge, because people don't turn up, right? So why do they don't turn up is because they don't see clear examples of who is standing by on this topic, right? So if there is somebody backing this up, then it works, right? So, and then also the aspect of normalizing this topic in the company, right? So that requires a lot of continuous communication. It requires consistent efforts from our side to make, and that's when it gets normalized. So it doesn't happen immediately, and people shouldn't be disheartened that I send 2 communications, still I have a challenge. It would be a challenge, right? So it will take time, have patience, and then after a period of time is when the normalization happens, right? So these are some challenges that we see, and then always the topic gets connected. I mean, it is treated as a soft topic until a case happens, right? So that's the turning point, right? So it is treated as a soft topic until a case happens. The moment it happens, things will turn around, right? So it's better not to wait for that, right? And then start off even before some. I mean, it's all about prevention, if I put it that way. Going back to the purpose, right? So these are some of the challenges that we see, that's there around when you want to do or conduct a PoSH training sessions.
I agree with you. Unfortunately, we've had quite a few companies come to us after the case has come. Before that, they don't bother. They're like, what PoSH? But the moment there's a case, then there's a whole scramble that happens. Very unfortunate that it needs, something like that has to trigger you to kind of implement PoSH at your place. Thank you. So Srividya, or maybe Karthik, whoever is comfortable with this question, a question related to trainings. Online sessions or offline sessions, which do you think works better? Because I have a personal idea about it, but I would like to hear from the panelists.
Both. I would say both.
Which do you think is more effective?
See, in-person trainings are the most effective because these are sensitive topics, okay? And then these have to be discussed with some cases, right? With anonymity and all of that, yes. But when it gets discussed in person, that's the best way of really having a dialogue on this topic, right? So you are actually discussing a case, and then you are actually putting out your view. You are validating your point of view, and then on many of the cases it gets invalidated by the trainer, right? So, and that's the right thing to happen, right? So that's the best way. Second is, it also depends on the audience whom you're addressing. For example, if you are looking at for example, the associate levels in a plant, for that matter, who is on the shop floor, right? So there, probably creative ways of doing it will help. It could be through street plays, it could be through using theater-based interventions, etc. So in-person works because they understand and absorb what is being told, right? So in-person is the best thing. However, it is also important for us to consider or not to ignore the power of online, right? Because the work has moved hybrid. A lot of people who are working online, right? And also the scale that you can achieve with WBTs or whatever it is, right? So it's quick and it happens on scale. So that aspect also needs to be considered. I mean, that's my view. Over to Srividya. I mean, she's done multiple trainings, so she can add her.
My vote is always for an in-person, and I have my reasons, obviously, which few of which Karthik has called out, because the intent is to engage, right? And conversations happen when you're in person. If efficacy of an in-person session, what I have seen is the topic itself moves from being something intimidating like a taboo to something that, okay, let's all participate, we all have a role, and it's not exclusive, it's not just women centric, that's the change that comes in. But having said that, of course, we can't ignore the reach that online gives. So that's also an aspect, a combination of two, identifying spots or clusters which need in person and where online. That's probably a call that the organization has to take.
Thank you. Just wanted to share something. So my personal thing is I prefer in person, obviously for the same reasons. And I just had a story to share. I'll keep it very brief. So I conducted a session in Chennai, and there were around 200 to 250 people who attended the session. And post the session, this one guy came up to me, and he was all flummoxed, and he said, "Can I ask you something?" And I said, "Yes, please do." And then he's like, "Actually, whatever you told today, I realized that I may have, unsuspectingly, actually sexually harassed some of my colleagues." I was a little taken aback that someone is coming and saying that I've done something like this. So I asked him to explain, and he said that he's from Delhi, and he says that he told me that his customs was very different over there, the way he approaches people, the way they talk. And when he came to Chennai, he brought back, he came in with that same idea. And he said that his office, especially his office, has a very orthodox, population. And he said that he was just being how he is in Delhi. But after listening to the whole lecture, he's like, most probably I have, overstepped some boundaries, which could be sexual in nature. My jokes could be considered as sexual in nature. Now, what do I do? So I just told him one thing. I said, maybe you can just go and talk to all of them, apologize, a blanket apology, and let them know that this is what it was because of, custom differences. And hopefully nobody should raise a complaint against you because you genuinely apologized. Now, if this had happened on an online session, where does he go? Who does he talk to? He's just going to take a session and say yes, no answers and get some scores out of it. So, but like you rightly said, if there's a huge population, you cannot have in-person sessions. It is going to be online sessions, which will have more reach. But yeah, personally, I prefer this. So going back to some of the things that both of you said, I want you all to kind of sum up. I have two questions here, and maybe you could kind of, I'll do it one at a time. Let's look at reporting and redressal. Maybe Srividya, you could take this up. What steps should an employee take if they experience or witness sexual harassment at the workplace?
All right. So if I were to say what steps, it's pretty much very organized. Speak up, know your policy. But before that comes the sensitization to tell them that just because you're going through a discomfort, it does not mean that you have to raise a complaint. Speak to somebody you trust, right? So that would also mean that the employer continues to communicate these steps. Otherwise, it's not possible for an employee to even identify and go and speak up. So speak up, access your policy, understand how it plays out, get in touch with your HR, your manager, your IC to understand whether this can be kind of redressed and in what manner it gets redressed. Now, this would involve, of course, sensitizing not just the employee, sensitizing your leaders, sensitizing your HR, sensitizing your manager to respond effectively if somebody were to walk up also. So I would say that yes, one, like Karthik mentioned, help them understand what's sexual, what not sexual. If you're facing, how do you approach, who do you approach? make sure this is disseminated very frequently, very conspicuously, so there is no doubt in an aggrieved person's mind as to how this will be taken ahead. Reinforce that we are here to listen. Let them know about presence of policy. Display your internal committee. This is, of course, the steps. But the steps that somebody experiencing this should do is to reach out to understand how this can be resolved. I hope I kind of answered what you were looking for, Yamuna.
So that is, yes, thank you, Srividya. Actually, you did. Just another question, because it's one part of the question. The other question is, what if I witness, as an employee, I witness sexual harassment? What are there any obligations or rights of mine? I mean, how do I take it forward? Because personally, I've seen witnesses who have either turned hostile or not even come forward to say that they witnessed something. So if you could just address some bits of that.
Right. Again, it's sensitization. Bystander intervention itself is a very powerful thing, right? If I'm going through somebody and somebody right next to me says, hey, they step in, they diffuse, that gives the aggrieved, far greater power to say, yes, somebody's standing behind me. So the idea is to ensure, as much as we call out, how do you escalate sexual harassment or how do you reach out, also continue to communicate about how witness reporting works and how, as a bystander, you either, even when someone walks up to you, how do you listen to their concern, don't diminish it, explain to them how they can report it. One. Second is, if it's happening in front of you, so train your employees on all of these aspects, right? If it's happening in front of you, how do you professionally diffuse the situation? If you witness somebody, put it out there. And all of this under the umbrella understanding that you have a duty to report, right? I always put this out in front of employees. There is a mobile phone, the owner's not around, it gets stolen. Will you be quiet about it? You're watching somebody take it away. Would you be quiet about it? You won't, right? Why will you be quiet about this? So you have a duty to report because you signed your employment contract, which calls out that any misconduct or you witness or you're made aware, please let the organization know.
Thanks, Srividya. Karthik, anything that you want to give in as your inputs, what your organization has with respect to witnesses, any policy that you have that, takes care of witnesses who maybe even come forward and, either complain on behalf of the complainant or see something and want to raise that complaint?
I think Srividya covered it, the aspect of strengthening bystanders, right? So that is very, very important. Again, sensitization is very important. Normally from an organizational policy point of view, one is you have a separate POSH policy and there are aspects of it, and how do you secure somebody who is also complaining is one aspect. Second one is also making POSH as a part of your whistleblower system, right? So that also is another very powerful mechanism to consider, and it's part of the whistleblower mechanism, right? So there are rights and protective mechanisms that are set in process, right? So setting up a very robust governance mechanism is I think key to take care of these aspects of bystander and their rights and all of that, right? So when they stand up, and if one or two instances of that happens, right, it again connects us back to the purpose of having the POSH Act of prevention, right? So it prevents future incident happening. And second thing which I see also is that when bystanders speak up and then they support an individual, right, people see it, right? And that message somehow goes around, right? So when that happens, people, it is actually acting as a deterrent for that matter, right? And it is like a CCTV camera, if I just put that anecdote, right? So it's there and people know there is a camera, so they understand that there is a bystander and they will stand by if some boundaries are crossed, right? So it's important from that point of view.
So some sort of domino effect where if one person stands up, then everybody else kind of takes a cue and they all stand up. Thank you. Very interesting inputs. Thank you so much. Statistics says 80% of Indian women face sexual harassment at the workplace, out of which 70% do not file any complaint. So Karthik, question to you, and then Srividya could take it up after Karthik. How can organizations encourage employees to report incidents without fear? Because I know we have policies, we have, so many things happening, we have employee awareness, and yet out of 80% who are facing sexual harassment, 70% are not filing any complaint. Yes, Karthik.
There could be multiple reasons for fear, right? So why would somebody not step up and then complain? There could be multiple reasons. I mean, there are a lot of emotions that they go through when they actually an incidents happen, or if you see an incident is happening, right? So a lot of emotions they go through. Right, so most of the times it is that they suffer in silence, right? So it is that one moment where you decide to go and complain, right? So what can organizations do in order to help them to overcome that moment, right, where they decide whether they want to complain or not complain? One example is that we have posters in the restrooms. Okay, we have put up, and then the hotline number is there, the IC details are there, etc. Because we've learned from some best practices from some companies that when a victim goes through those emotions, they normally get into a restroom, they cry, they close the door, etc. And that's where, if you see a message saying that you can reach out to somebody for help, right? So that changes the whole world for them at that point in time, right? So that's very important, right?
Very interesting.
Yeah, these are some things that the organization can do. Second one, very important to consider is how do you build the visibility and credibility of the IC?
Yes.
So that's the responsibility of the organization to do, right? While we put up the policy, there are pictures of the people who are part of the IC, etc. How do you build the credibility of the IC, right? So that happens over a lot of communications that we do, sensitizations. IC members being part of the sensitization programs in every area. For example, if there is an IC in one location, the presiding officer and the committee members have to participate in the sensitization program. Right? It's not outsourced and then leave it, right? So that won't work. So they have to participate, they have to be visible, they have to be the face of a greater purpose that they are actually serving for, right? So that's very important. And then how do you create safety nets for ICs, right? So that also is important, right? So I mean, if a person who is part of the IC, and imagine there is a presiding officer and there is a case, there is a lot of effort that goes in that first 90 days while they have to get this whole thing sorted out. That means their regular work will be hindered, right? So it's the responsibility of the organization again to back that person up, right, and say that, hey, your regular work will be taken care of in some form and manner. Concentrate on this, right? So how do you create that safety net for the person who is part of the IC? That also is a responsibility of the organization, right? So if we set up all of this and probably more, I mean, these are three things that I can recall, right? So once you build these things, you are actually encouraging employees to report all these incidents without fear, right? So some examples, Srividya, over to you. I mean, if you want to add.
Very valid points. Thank you so much, Karthik. You've given us various dimensions to it, not just, a unidimensional answer. Thank you so much. Srividya, anything you would like to add?
No, I think Karthik has almost covered everything. Another thing is, bring out micro actions, right? Every cluster, every manager, every team lead, town hall, let them speak about it. Let it not be a sensitization session, but a confidence building or a conversation session to say that, or a talk to say, are you all feeling safe? Is it fine? That kind of builds that psychological safety. Also, I see engaging not as a part of a redressal or prevention, but as a part of connecting with the workforce. Seems like a very humongous task, but you need to break it down and see how you can set it in practice, because this is not like a singular short journey. It's a long marathon. So once you start to few practices like this, set them in motion, they're going to continue to change how this whole thing is perceived in the organization, thereby building the trust to come and speak up is
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep a very short question for both of you, and then we'll open the floor for any questions. We'll not be able to take up all the questions. I'm letting you all know beforehand, people who joined in the session, because time is our enemy at this point of time. So what is that one advice that you would like to give organizations that are just starting their PoSH journey? Karthik, maybe if you can give it in 1 minute and then Srividya 1 minute. I'm sorry, I'm really asking you to squeeze it in. Please go ahead. Yes.
I mean, the first and foremost thing is leadership commitment. Okay, so this is executive leadership commitment. They have to stand for it, right? And second one is also very important. Articulate why are you doing this, right? Not because of the act, but because we believe as an organization that we have to create a psychologically safe space, right? So that's very, very important for us to create, right? And third thing is, like I think Srividya mentioned already, about creation of the policy, the act, implementation, setting up the IC, etc., etc.
Yes.
But 1 and 2 is paramount. Over to you, Srividya.
Thank you.
I would say compliance is easier than non-compliance. Think about it. And I would also like to add that, it's not just what you do, it's how you do what you do that sends out the right messaging in the organization. So,
Right.
like Karthik mentioned, leadership being, at the forefront to kind of carry this ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. And that is right on time. We have a minute left for questions. If people have questions, please do drop it in the chat box. You can open your mics if that is a possibility, and we'll try and see what we can answer. Any questions? I'm just taking a look at the chat box. Or if you cannot drop in questions for whatever reason, you can always write to us, and we'll be happy to take your questions later on. Thank you so much, Karthik and Srividya. Okay, there's one question from Shilpa. Is it mandatory person from NGO should be external member? So who can be an external member?
I'll take this one, Yamuna.
Yes, please.
Yeah, what the Act clearly calls out is external member can be someone from an NGO, specifically worked in the area of women's issues, or a legal practitioner. So both of these would work.
Thank you. Sandhya is asking, an organization doesn't have any female employees nor any sister concern. Can they empanel someone else? Basically, as a presiding officer is what I'm thinking, Sandhya. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. So a little tricky here. It's a very gray area. I'll just put out a few thoughts here. Yeah, then the organization has, like I always say, figure out your diversity. We have a leader here who's right there. In addition to that, of course, there are people take some backdoor nature of things of having a law firm represent or bringing in a consultant, all of that. But that's very tricky because what we have to continue to remember, it's a quasi-judicial nature of, compliance. Anything that vitiates the composition of the IC can vitiate the entire process itself, right? So we'll have to keep that in mind.
There is an interesting question. Maybe Karthik wants to take this up. Vijay was asking, usually organizations say we don't have any issue. It is a good place. How do you answer that? And I'm sorry, in the interest of time, this is going to be the last question. More questions will have to be emailed to us.
I mean, if somebody is saying that there is no issue, then there is a serious issue. You have to ask. Okay. You have to ask and not assume. Never assume, ask.
Never assume, ask. Very true. Very true. If some organization is saying we don't have any issue, seriously, yeah, then whoever's helming it or whoever's saying it really needs to have a recheck. I'm very skeptical when people say last 10 years we've had no complaints. That means either they don't have a proper policy in place, or the person who needs to complain has actually quit and left. It's quite difficult to think of an organization that has been there for whatever number of years with absolutely no complaint.
It's okay to have that uncomfortable position of asking more. That's okay, but ask.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So thank you so much. I'm sorry we'll not be able to take more questions because of time constraint. But thank you so much to the viewers who joined us. More thanks to Karthik and Srividya for giving us your valuable time.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yamuna. Thank you, Karthik.
Thank you. Thank you, Srividya. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. See you all soon. Good evening.
Good evening.